Afternoon all. The Bilbao Masters, played in Spain at the moment, is having some very interesting games. In round 1, Vishy Anand was playing a former FIDE world champion, Ponomariov. So Ponomariov actually won the FIDE championship when he was 18, the FIDE world championship, and was for 2 years champion. So Vishy has been champion for longer overall, of course. So let's see what happened. D4, D6. Right, we see actually a King's Engine emerging out of the opening. So King's Engine, and this very dangerous Makagonov system, H3. You might think, what's all this about? Well, White is trying to get a quick G4 and basically clamp down on F5, which is often Black's source of counterplay. Here, Black often now plays E5 in this position. White plays D5. Now A5, as though the C5 square might be useful for a knight later, uninterrupted by B4. Bishop E3, knight A6. Now there's G4. So basically saying to Black, you're not going to have the usual King's Engine counterplay with the F pawn. That fun's been taken away from the position. Knight C5, looking at E4. So how to protect this? Queen C2 seems possible. Knight D2 actually was chosen. C6. And now Bishop E2. White has a small advantage here in space in the centre. And it's a kind of uncomfortable position actually for Black if Black hasn't got a clear way of generating counterplay. Because White is actually going to continue increasing space with G5 soon. And in fact, after Bishop D7, there's also another potential liability in this position, that the D6 pawn can be potentially backward. So that's something to look out for as well on this D file, if ever these two pawns are removed. We see G5 gaining space, so on the king side. Now H4, which actually frees up potentially now the bishop without leaving the G5 pawn behind. So that's another thing to factor in all the time, the capture. Now F6 was played. Giving up the bishop here isn't such a big deal, I think. This doesn't really do anything. It's giving Black the D6 square, which will be quite comfortable. But the C5 knight is targeted with knight B3. So White doesn't mind leaving this pawn on G5. That F file doesn't seem that significant. We see B6 now. An alternative knight takes B3 might be considered, but I think it's nice for White after A takes B3. The double pawns here might not be such a big deal. White seems to have good play, for example, even with C5 here, or H5, on both sides of the board in fact. So anyway, B6, trying to keep that knight steady on C5. Now White took on C5 with the knight. B takes C5, Queen D2, and we've got this permanent idea that D takes is exposing D6 all the time. So it's something to be factored in. FG, HG. As Black, I wouldn't be that happy really about the state of the affairs here. You know, unlike many variations of the Slav defense, you wouldn't catch Vishy usually playing Black on the back side of this. But as White, you know, White enjoys greater space advantage in the centre on the king side, and potentially there's a D6 issue as well. This file could be opened up. We see C takes D5, and already after this position, if an engine was playing White, Black would be in serious trouble already at move 18. It seems well, Vishy played knight takes D5, but if Queen takes D5, this is quite vicious in its own right. For example, Rook F7. There's actually, I wonder if you can guess what there is if I give you 5 seconds here on Rook F7. 5 seconds to pause the video. Okay, there's actually this move which is quite nice. So if takes, we take here. And if knight C7, that doesn't actually help here. White could play Rook takes G7, which shatters, basically, helps undermine the whole structure here. After Queen takes D6, the whole structure is compromised. So E5 could be dropping, etc. For example, Queen F6 is nasty, and then G6 drops there. So it's very difficult for black to do anything. It's so that would almost spell the end of the game. And you might think, well, King H8 in this position, after castling, white is threatening Rook takes H7, and that's tricky. For example, well, there's actually other ideas in the position as well here. To torture D6, all this. What does black actually play here? It just shows really that the position sometimes from the king's engine is precarious, to say the least. Unfortunately, this position here is also very, very interesting for white. Maybe even stronger than taking here. I mean, this is strong. Just smashing black's pawn string with F4 here. Because if it takes, then it's very dangerous. White has got lots of threats. It looks like compromised. If this pawn is removed, then there's Queen E5 check. As an example, just to show bishop takes, rook takes. It just shows how precarious black's position is. So this sort of thing, yeah, engines really love this for white as well. So in theory, it's really quite dodgy. But even in the game continuation, knight takes d5, white is better here. White's got a big space advantage. It's a fantastic knight. And okay, Ponomariov now plays rook f7 here. So white castles, and white still can pursue a basic plan with that g5, sort of stopping the stopping h5. This h7 is actually looking like it can just be doubled against quite easily. And in fact, we see this now with just the move rook h2. What does white actually worry about with this huge knight on d5 here? Not too much to worry about. It's attacked. So now Vishy retreats it actually, knight c3. I mean, even if maybe this is still okay for white, even if it's given up. I mean, or is black really going to take that? Because again, that rook will be pinned. This will actually be very nice again. So it's a very, very comfortable position, but the knight actually does retreat, and Vishy seems to be setting his targets on the poor d6 pawn now, that backward pawn, knight b5 coming up to hit d6. So we see queen b5 and knight b5, and it also of course blunts that b file. So bishop f8, very defensive, and a4. So even though it's creating a hole there, how is black going to exploit this hole here at all, this b4 weakness with that chronic d6? I mean, if knight c7 to try and get a knight here, I think that can be just ignored. Maybe white just plays rook h4 to play for f4 later and try and get more pressure on this, and also open up this diagonal, and that's similar to an idea which occurs in the game later to play for f4. So here a4 queen b7, so e4 is attacked, it's defended like this, bishop e7, king b1, queen c6. So black really hasn't got active counterplay right now. Bishop d2, looking at a5, that's protected. Queen d3, looking at d6 again. Rook bb7, rook f1. Now this active plan to open up lines, as I say, this diagonal, or just this diagonal for the d6 pawn, is very interesting for white. Rook f8, and it's played now, so white's like prepared this slowly and without too much fear here. It looks as though rook f7 might be a good counter resource, but I'm not sure it does anything here after f4. If rook b f7 there, in fact f5 would be possible here, it seems. G takes g6, this is dangerous for queen h3. This sort of thing looks quite dangerous, and probably to be avoided. So after f4, in fact, e takes f4 was played, rook takes f4. So what's happening with the simplification here? Rook takes f4, bishop takes f4. Well, d6 is under scrutiny, clearly, and have a kind of Maroczy bind against that poor d6 pawn. Rook f7. Setting, I think, a little trap. If bishop takes, we go into a pin with rook d7. That's winning for black. If e5, then bishop f5, ouch, skewer, end of game. No, so that shouldn't be taken there. Under better circumstances, the bishop retreats actually and looks at a5 again, and it's protected. But there's also maybe in the future this diagonal could be useful. Bishop e7. So is this another little thing? Well, if takes here, then maybe bishop takes g5. Let's just check that. Bishop takes g5. So the bishops are attacking each other's pawns here, keeping each other in balance. But rook g2, now bishop a5 is bishop takes a5 is threatened. So queen b6. Now an interesting decision here to try and make roads into black's position. Bishop g4, it actually difficult to avoid this exchange of bishops. The bishop can't really escape this. And basically, white is softening up the d5 square, and the whole complex of light squares could be under white's control soon. Bishop takes g4, rook takes g4. So already this pin looks as though it could be useful in variations. Knight c7 stops that. Rook f4, Vishy doesn't mind the other rooks coming off. A difficult position. What is white actually threatening? Well, let's say we just retreat the rook here. Then this is good. Knight takes, and if it takes here, check. And this diagonal is lethal, actually. So this is actually a forced mate in 7, believe it or not, after bishop c3 check. Ouch. Look at the queen and the bishop coordinating. So black has to be careful here along this diagonal. So black actually played knight e6. Apparently the engine suggestion here is to take here on f4, seemingly inviting d6 pawn torture. Still, I mean, this looks like a miserable position. If takes here, white has this queen d5 coming up, and it looks fairly miserable for black after that. So anyway, black decided, Ponomariov played knight e6, and it goes into a horrendous pin. I think statistically pins win a lot of games. If you look at pins, players go out of their way to sacrifice sometimes pawns or pieces to create pins. Here we have a horrendous one, queen d5, and often, it often helps almost zugzwang players when they're in when they're in horrible pins. Here, how many moves has black got available now? It seems a very, very difficult position. We see queen d8. And then Vishy asks black what he's doing actually with this waiting move, king a2. White can improve the position. If the queen just went back, white can now play in various ways. Maybe just bishop f4 using the pin to torture d6 is one, and we can actually just, I think, safely win it now. Knight takes d6, so that's one way. So yes, it's a miserable game for black. It seems straight from the opening. Is it going to be called the killer Makagonov system soon, this h3 and g4 idea? I've just seen it win so many games actually, quite a few games we've seen on this channel against king's engines. So bishop f4 torturing the poor d6. It's possible, it seems, to take it here without too much punishment, but we see strengthening the position first with b3. That secures a4. Maybe there was a slight problem there, but it seems actually from an engine point of view, bishop takes, because we can always take with the queen, we don't have to take with the knight. It's check anyway there, but no, strengthening the position first. Where's d6 going to in any case? It's not going anywhere. So bishop e7, now it's taken, knight takes d6. Yes, black is getting dismantled, it seems. Now e5, there's another virtual pin here in this position. Well, what is going on after e5, you might think? Let's rule out knight takes f4 because there's queen f7 checkmate. And you might think, well, this bishop's hanging. What about bishop takes d6? That's interesting because actually there's a pin here now. bishop g3, and we can actually get the bishop back next move. Knight d4, ed. This is better for white. c5 is loose here. Yes, so e5, nice move. Black played knight takes g5 here, and queen takes c5, so a5 now under scrutiny as well. Queen g4. The bishop goes back to c1, engines like this. King's given some safety here. h5, as though this pawn's really quite dangerous. But Vishy takes the time out here to play queen takes a5. So this is going to be a long-term danger now, this a pawn. Check, h4. So it's a battle of passed pawns, but also king safety. White's king is much safer here. Queen b5, black's king is already threatened with queen e8, winning the bishop. So queen a8. And already it looks as though if white had an extra, if white's pawn was on a5, I think a6 would be virtually winning here. It just so happens h3's h2, h1 is what black's banking on. So some precision needed. Let's just show that, just a5, h3. Even this position though, apparently this is good for white with e6. If a6 then h2, and then big trouble for white. So Vishy has to be careful. He plays c5, so he's preparing to totally blunt the queen's influence for the docking square of the pawn. h3, c6, blunting the queen's influence, and also threatening now c7. So this is actually a much faster pawn than this one, ready to go to c8's queen. Bishop d8, stopping c7. Queen d5, which actually provides the resource c7. So if the queen's temporarily offered, then we can queen winning a piece with check. So bishop c7. Now we see bishop c1. I think there are other ways of winning this position. Engine's just e6. So threatening queen g5. And if here, in fact this can be taken because black's king is just getting mated. For example, like this. That's checkmate. But anyway, bishop c1 is very, very strong as well. Queen a5. Okay, this can even be taken and still white's winning. In fact, if taking, the position is just so strong. Bishop takes h2, e6. So white's queening here, and apparently this is nearly like +6. So this is a bad state of affairs. Knight b5, queen e1, check. Again, there's other moves. The bishop g5 is working. Check. Anyway, here, knight takes c7. h2. Yeah, it looks really quite dangerous to allow this, but after knight e8 check, black has to be very, very careful now. He played king h6. Let's examine king h8. Apparently this is a force mate in 11, funny enough, after knight f6. Yeah, king safety is a problem. Queen g8 threatens. So yeah, that's not good. So king h6 was played. Knight f6 actually threatens bishop f8, checkmate here. The knight is cutting the king here. Check, bishop b2. And with that check, by the way, now the queen is controlling this square. Knight e4 doesn't really do anything. Black is actually, black is actually lost whatever happens in this position. Can you guess the final move here for Vishy? Very simple. If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video. Okay, he just takes here. He doesn't mind black queening. After taking black queens, c7. White's a whole bishop up here. Black resigned. So move 61, black resigned. If he takes, white queens, the whole bishop up. So yeah, I think this is a very, very dangerous system, Makagonov system. I think it's worth trying in our own games. It's just designed against black's f5, so I think psychologically, you know, the classic games when the King's Engine was popular, very popular, you know, with Kasparov and Fischer, you know, you often saw the move f5. This system's aiming to restrain black's counterplay, so I think it is gaining in popularity, this system here. Okay, it seems, you know, white's prepared to castle queenside and basically enjoyed a space advantage in the centre. On the king side, relatively good king safety, yeah, just a very, very comfortable position all the way through. Even with the inaccuracy, it didn't really matter. The queen d5, knight d5, it was still a very dominating position. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.